In this episode, we speak with David Flynn, the CEO and co-founder of Hammerspace, which delivers a global data environment which spans across data centers, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud infrastructure. David is a recognized leader in IT innovation and has been architecting disruptive computing platforms since his early work in supercomputing and Linux systems. Early on, David had a fascination with understanding how things work, a passion for technology, and the potential to make significant contributions to society through innovation. Before Hammerspace, David pioneered the use of Flash for enterprise application acceleration as founder and former CEO of Fusion.io, which was acquired by SanDisk in 2014. He also served as chief architect at Linux Networx, where he was instrumental in the creation of the OpenFabrics stack and designed several of the world's largest supercomputers, leveraging Linux clustering, InfiniBand, and RDMA-based technologies. I am your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
David, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thanks for having me on, RJ. Really appreciate the opportunity.
I always like to kick off with somewhere interesting. I always find it interesting when someone has a deep background in technology. You studied computer science in college, and then you've kind of stuck with technology.
Yeah. It goes back further than
Okay,
that.
yeah.
I started as a hobbyist, taught myself programming when I was a kid in high school. I actually ended up working for Computer Science Corporation, building a flight simulator for an Army missile system in my junior and senior year in high school, out of Huntsville, Alabama, big into rocket science. So I started well before the college and the formal education, just as I think technology was a lot more approachable then, learning how to use software. This was on the old Commodore 64, for example.
Mm-hmm. And was it through school? Was it through friends that kind of where you caught the bug?
Well, my dad was a physicist, and so I got to hang around physics departments and some early computer systems then. This was in the early 80s. So it's when home computers, I consider myself the echo boom. I had the chance to work a lot with Steve Wozniak at my former company, Fusion.io. We did a lot of traveling together, and I had to confess to him that we grew up rather poor and couldn't afford the Apple II. So I used the Commodore 64, and that's what I taught myself programming on. So I consider myself kind of the echo. He and his generation made computing available in the form of personal computers. And then in my generation, we learned on those, and that's kind of what started the bug.
Now, I don't hear the Southern accent. You must have moved around quite a bit.
Yeah, my mom is actually from out west, and dad from Central Florida, which is a very different accent from the rest of the Deep South. But yeah, I grew up in the Deep South in Huntsville, Alabama, Kentucky before that, North Carolina. My dad went to Duke. So didn't get too much of the accent. If I talk to somebody from that, I can slip back into it. But my wife threatened to divorce me when I did that. So.
And then how did you find your way to meeting Steve Wozniak?
So my previous venture, we invented what has become NVMe, the high performance solid state flash used in the data center. It's really kind of exciting. The technology that I pioneered with Fusion.io is now going to be a $500 billion per year industry, $500 billion worth of enterprise SSDs, NVMe in particular. In the next couple of years, it's going to cross over. So very few people can say that they, created an industry that's going to be $500 billion a year in volume. But in the early days, it was through a friend of a friend who was one of these connector types, connected to everybody. And, telling him about what we were doing, he's like, Steve Wozniak is going to find this very interesting because part of the design philosophy of NVMe, of this hardware device, was to eliminate not needed hardware, get rid of stuff that was no longer called for and greatly simplify the whole thing. And this was really Steve Wozniak's claim to fame in designing hardware. He built Breakout for Atari, and they told him that he would get paid X if he used this number of chips, and he'd get paid something much more than that if he could use fewer chips. And he'd beat even their highest expectations for reducing the chip count on it. And so he really identified with what we were doing. So we had him join the company as our chief scientist and did a lot of traveling together with him.
Fantastic. And by this time, were you in Silicon Valley? So you graduate from, I guess I'll go back to your graduating from BYU. What did you do next?
Right. So I had worked during college for an outfit that built noise monitoring, industrial microphones, and we built GIS systems for airports around the country for tracking noise levels around the perimeter out into the surrounding neighborhoods at airports. And for that work, I built, again, it was three-dimensional to render the area around the airport and map the different neighborhoods. And all of this was done using Oracle databases. And so we built a GIS, a graphics information system that used Oracle database as the main system of record for the whole thing. And so upon graduating high school, I went to work for Oracle in their web group. This was when Larry Ellison had first thought to compete in the web browser wars, but it was right before the bloodbath between Microsoft and Netscape. And so the Oracle Power Browser didn't really make it out of the chute. What Larry did instead was take the whole team, me included, and a few guys in Salt Lake. This was in Salt Lake City. He spun out to poke Microsoft and Intel in the eye with the smart terminal. You might remember the network computer. Sun and IBM had the Java Station and Java OS. They were going to build an OS based on Java, a really stupid idea, which fell flat on its face. And they ended up using the technology that we built at Network Computer Inc., NCI. So we embedded, this was pre-Linux, so we used BSD, and we embedded an operating system on an ARM processor, which now is in every major mobile device, on the Power PC and on the RS-6000 older RISC processors. Anyway, so went to work for Oracle and became part of the early web era with web technology and smart terminal technology. It's the short answer to what I did right after.
Well, let's head into present day and Hammerspace and tell us, for the benefit of our audience, what Hammerspace does and why you decided to embark on this journey.
So we make data a global resource. Today, data is a prisoner to the storage system or service that stores it. And it is only useful in close proximity to those storage systems, especially if you need any semblance of performance in your access to that data. In other words, if you put your data in Amazon's storage services, you are a prisoner not only to Amazon, but the specific region of the Amazon greater ecosystem. If you put it in US East, that's where you have to do all your work. If you put it in US West, that's where you have to do all your work. If you put it in a NetApp or Dell EMC storage system on-prem, your computing has to be in close proximity. They talk about that as data gravity, and the fact that your users and applications are sort of stuck in close orbit of the data. And in the modern era, that is not going to work, not for the era of AI. You need your data to be able to move where you can get the GPUs. So Hammerspace is doing data orchestration and global file system with what we call hyperscale NAS. It allows you to get extreme levels of performance and have data be ubiquitous across different facilities. So you can have the same data, live, accessible, read, write, modifiable, both in the cloud and on-prem, alternate locations where you have GPUs and a GPU cloud. So this really is kind of the perfect storm, the AI revolution, causing the industry to finally grapple with the demons of data being too localized, too much of a prisoner to the specific storage systems. And we're liberating data from its prison of these storage systems by making it an orchestrated resource. That's the high level of it.
And when you first started out, did you think, okay, we're going to approach this sector because we think this sector is like ripe for the solution? How did you go about bringing the solution to market?
Well, with Fusion IO, my previous venture, we unlocked unprecedented levels of performance by moving from mechanical hard drives to solid state. And we built the premier way to integrate solid state to deliver the most performance. And so I had a front row seat to the challenges that the industry had consuming this several orders of magnitude higher performance. And the storage systems were the main bottlenecks to that. And so when I left Fusion IO, it was with a very clear understanding that something had to change to fix data, to accelerate the performance, and to increase the agility so that you could get at the data from different facilities. And so I set out sort of trusting that demands for ever increasing levels of performance to ever larger quantities of data, would grow over time. But in the past couple of years, AI has been a step function increase in that. So I couldn't have predicted that AI was going to be such a demand driver for what we were building. But it really has. And it's a good thing because I started working on this project nearly 10 years ago in various forms through to the current incarnation in the company Hammerspace. It's a really foundational technology. We're talking about file systems and how operating systems consume networked data. It's sort of at the heart of the operating system.
Would you say that, there's certain industries that have the largest demand for your solution, whether it's life sciences, financial services?
Those are two very good examples right there.
Mm-hmm.
Media and entertainment, chip design, industrial design. We, in the industrial design world, and going back to my growing up in Huntsville, Alabama, big in rocket science, one of our customers is Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using it in Huntsville and in Washington State and in Florida and in Texas, basically to give a unified data across all of the distributed organization and to do hybrid cloud. So it's kind of cool to say Jeff Bezos, his own company, is using Hammerspace as the way to do hybrid cloud into his cloud.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've built multiple companies, and I'm curious if there's one aspect about building a company that's the hardest, and it's always the hardest. Like, what's the biggest challenge?
Boy, at different phases, you face different challenges, and every single time it can be an existential threat to it. But I would say the largest challenge is having people keep the faith because there will be dark days. And it takes a lot of work. I like to say building a successful startup requires not just one miracle, but a continuous succession of miracles. And so you need miracle workers, people who can pull off the impossible, and getting that talent and inspiring those people to lay it all on the line is really the trick to it. So keeping the faith, having folks stick through this tough time. And I would say avoiding internal drama. I've seen that kill way too many companies. And so luckily, that's not a challenge we've had because we've learned to nip that sort of thing off at the bud. But getting rid of internal strife, because that'll kill you faster than anything else. If people are working cross purposes, running agendas, that sort of thing, you just can't tolerate that.
Yeah, we frequently talk about recruiting and how challenging it is. And, I've had people, use the statistic of about 60% success rate. Curious if you've been able to get better at recruiting along the way.
Well, we have a high 90% success rate at landing the people that we set out to land. It's a tight community too. Folks who understand file systems, file storage systems, and data. It's a pretty small community. I mean, there's been hundreds of companies, but most people who are worth their salt have worked at various companies with each other over the past. There's only so many companies that have been successful in the space. Fusion IO being one of those in the storage space. So I have an unfair advantage that I have worked with a lot of talented people in my previous venture, and then you just network and it set out to find the right folks. And when you have a really compelling vision, which we do here, it makes it a lot easier to get folks who are attracted to sort of that big challenge, big vision. So it hasn't been too hard for us, but I can imagine it can be a challenge, yes.
One thing I'm always curious about is being able to maintain the drive, as an entrepreneur. I mean, clearly you've done this multiple times over. What drives you?
Well, we were very financially successful at Fusion.io. The company went from first revenue to nearly $250 million a year in less than 3 years. And from first investment at 30 million to a $3.2 billion valuation in those same 3 years, which, by the way, included 2008 and 2010. So right during the crises then. It actually helped accelerate our business because people were looking for ways to change the game. And Fusion.io with the high performance flash was that game changer. We see the same thing now, by the way, with the economic stressors are a good reason for people to look outside the norm.
hmm One thing I always ask everyone is, do you think entrepreneurs are born or made?
I think they're made. And it sort of goes to the drive. I could have retired after Fusion.io, but I looked at what to do. It did actually cause more than a little bit of self-reflection of what do I want to do now that I could do anything or nothing at all and just go sit on a beach. And I came back to the fact that as a early in my life, it was just a hobby and it's what I enjoy doing is technology. So, I went and started all over again with Hammerspace to build really cool technology just because that's what I enjoy doing.
hmm
So I think there's an element to both of that. And it starts with you got to have something that you really enjoy doing.
hmm
And I'd say that's the more born part. And okay, so now you have something you really enjoy doing. The made part is that had better be motivation enough to overcome the challenges to learn how to build a company and build a successful team and get the stuff to market and power through all of the setbacks that are going to be had along the way. So it takes a combination of but I think the motivation is sort of born with some sort of passion about something. It's hard to learn that.
Do you have any insights into how to develop a great culture?
Well, I do. My philosophy on culture is, if people are busy enough in pursuit of the company's mission and goals, it leaves little time to work at cross purposes. And so just making sure people are really busy, which has the ancillary benefit of you're not wasting money and time as well. So just we don't have money or time to waste on doing things that aren't central to the mission. And if everybody's working on stuff that's central to the mission, it leaves very little time to play politics
Mm.
and all of that. Now, that said, part of the key to that is being able to recognize when people are or are not actually contributing and staying occupied, and then not being afraid to make changes quickly when it comes to upgrading, where you need to upgrade people, and just not tolerating people working at cross purposes.
Do you have thoughts on what's most beneficial in terms of remote versus in person?
We're completely distributed. Going into COVID, we got rid of our facilities. And now this is software engineering that has been sort of a solved problem. And it's very close to the open source community. Several of my team are actually Linux kernel maintainers of different parts of the Linux kernel.
hmm
And that's a very distributed team. So I think, though, as we start to hire more junior folks out of college, having the in person is going to be more important. To the earlier stages of the company, we were hiring mainly veterans with lots of experience and have the knowledge and know how to work remote. And there's not as much knowledge sharing that's needed at that level. But as you get a more diverse workforce with people earlier in their career, I think it's really important to have in person.
Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound impact on you?
Well, it might sound cliche, but I'd say my father would probably be the most impactful on that. He was the first in his family to go to college, and he went and got a degree in nuclear physics and with graduated summa cum laude and 4.0. So he did it upright. So he's always been sort of the scientist type, and yet also very deeply religious. So very strong work ethic. And so I'd have to say there. Now, from there, I'd say there's quite a few people who I have had the privilege of learning from. The gentleman who co-founded Fusion.io with me was a serial entrepreneur, and he's really who got me to step outside of my comfort zone as just a Uber engineer and go into founding companies and building teams and such. That's Mr. Rick White. So a lot of the success that we had at Fusion.io was through his experience. And so I'd rate him up there highly as well.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Well, I had the privilege of getting to live in Israel for a few years when I first got this project off the ground, working with an engineering team there. And so I have to say, living there for a few years, I'm not Jewish myself, but I do have a strong connection with the people there. So I think of anything in terms of the macro environment right now, solving the challenges there that are being faced is a big deal for me. And I still retain a lot of friends that are there and who were personally affected by the ongoing war. So without wading too much into politics, I'll put that out there as one of the things that's closest to my heart right now. Is it's heart-wrenching to see what's going on. Completely uncalled for. It's a failure of leadership across many different countries that those things weren't averted in the first place. So I'd say that.
I appreciate you sharing your views and your connection. You know, it's clearly a topic that's top of mind for everyone. So I appreciate your thoughts there. Well, David, want to thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks, RJ, for having me on.